14 vintage Hollywood celebs who raised their hand to their wife. Domestic abuse is a dark reality that even Hollywood's golden era couldn't escape. Behind the glamour and fanfare, some of the biggest stars hid troubling behavior, including violence toward their wives. While audiences admired them on screen, privately, these celebrities left a trail of pain and scandal. In this video, we take a closer look at 14 vintage Hollywood stars whose abusive actions shocked those closest to them. Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen's marriage to actress Ali MacGraw was one of Hollywood's most iconic yet deeply troubled unions, and by MacGraw's own accounts, it involved consistent emotional abuse, control, and infidelity that took a heavy toll on her personally and professionally. McQueen and MacGraw met on the set of The Getaway and quickly became one of Hollywood's it couples. They married in Cheyenne, Wyoming in 1973 after both had divorced their previous spouses. At the time, McQueen was arguably at the peak of his fame, known as the King of Cool, and MacGraw was one of the most sought-after actresses of the era. Despite the glamorous public image, the reality behind closed doors was far darker. MacGraw later described McQueen as possessive and insecure, with mood swings that could swing from charm to deep hostility. She recounted that he became jealous easily and even convinced himself she was unfaithful, despite his own repeated affairs. After years of infidelity and emotional abuse, their marriage deteriorated and they divorced in 1978. MacGraw's autobiography and interviews paint a picture of an emotional dynamic marked by control and eroded self-worth. At McQueen's urging, she gave up her acting career and became a homemaker, a decision that MacGraw later acknowledged she made out of fear of losing him rather than genuine desire. His influence was such that she didn't work for 5 years and even signed a prenuptial agreement waiving her right to any of his money. While their marriage still included wonderful days, MacGraw has characterized the difficult periods as horrendous, describing how his jealousy, control, and infidelity created a cycle of emotional harm that broke the union. Charlie Chaplin. Teenage actress Lita Gray married Charlie Chaplin in 1924 while still a minor, a fact that alone placed their relationship under intense legal and moral scrutiny even by the standards of the 1920s. Chaplin, one of the most powerful figures in early Hollywood, had already built a carefully controlled public image, while Gray entered the marriage with little protection, limited agency, and no comparable influence. Their union was widely viewed as rushed, largely because Gray had become pregnant, a circumstance that further intensified the imbalance of power between them. The divorce proceedings in 1927 revealed disturbing details that went far beyond an unhappy marriage. Court documents record that Gray accused Chaplin of sexual exploitation, coercion, and ongoing emotional mistreatment. She described being subjected to degrading and harmful demands that caused her fear and distress, presenting the marriage as one in which she had little control or safety. These allegations were taken seriously enough by the court to result in an unprecedented financial settlement, reflecting both the severity of the claims and the legal risk Chaplin faced if the case continued publicly. Following the divorce, Gray largely withdrew from Hollywood and avoided public discussion of her marriage for most of her life. Later biographical accounts suggest that the experience left her emotionally shaken and distrustful, with long-lasting effects on her sense of security and personal identity. Her brief acting career never fully recovered, and she struggled to escape the shadow of a marriage that began when she was still a child. From a historical perspective, Gray's case was highly unusual for its time. In the 1920s, young women had little legal or social support when accusing influential men of abuse. Studio systems often worked to suppress scandals, and the press frequently protected male stars. That Gray's allegations entered the public record at all required an extraordinary legal battle. Even then, many aspects of her experience remained unspoken for decades, illustrating how deeply domestic and sexual abuse were concealed in early Hollywood. Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy was one of the most decorated American soldiers of World War II, and an extraordinary number of other military awards for his battlefield valor. After the war, he embarked on a successful Hollywood career, appearing in more than 40 films and often playing rugged Western heroes. However, beneath the surface of public acclaim, Murphy struggled deeply with post-traumatic stress, then often called combat fatigue, a condition that profoundly affected his personal life and relationships. Murphy's first marriage, to actress Wanda Dixie Hendricks in 1949, became visibly troubled in part due to the psychological scars he brought home from the war. Murphy suffered from insomnia, nightmares, and emotional volatility throughout his post-war years, symptoms now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. He often slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow and experienced intense anxiety and flashbacks, behaviors that alarmed those closest to him. According to multiple historical accounts and biographies, Hendricks later told researchers and biographers that Murphy once held a loaded gun on her during an argument, an incident she described as frightening and irrational, a direct manifestation of his inner turmoil rather than premeditated malice. This episode is documented in published sources about Murphy's life and PTSD struggles, and it was a critical factor in her decision to end the marriage. Hendricks's account situates the incident in the broader context of Murphy's difficulty coping with civilian life after experiencing some of the fiercest combat of World War II. Friends and colleagues also reported that Murphy's stress and mood swings could be intense, and he was known to react unpredictably when confronted with reminders of his wartime experiences. Ultimately, Hendricks filed for divorce, finalizing their separation in 1951. Their brief and turbulent marriage reflects not only the personal costs of Murphy's post-war adjustment, but also the way untreated psychological trauma could surface in domestic situations. Scholars and historians cite these details not to diminish Murphy's extraordinary military legacy, but to illuminate the full human complexity behind his legend, including how the invisible wounds of war sometimes affected those closest to him. John Wayne. John Wayne married Esperanza Chata Bauer in 1946, during a period when his screen persona as a dominant, stoic masculine figure was becoming inseparable from his real-life public image. Behind the scenes, however, their marriage was marked by instability, heavy drinking, and escalating conflict. Contemporary court records from their 1953 divorce show that the relationship had deteriorated to the point where both parties accused each other of cruelty and violence, with repeated references to alcohol-fueled incidents. Newspaper reports from the time explicitly mention charges of drunken violence, a phrase commonly used in mid-20th century legal language to describe physical altercations that occurred during intoxication. Bauer's letters and later statements indicate that Wayne's drinking played a central role in her fear of him. She described his rages as sudden and explosive, creating an environment in which she felt unsafe. In at least one public account, Bauer acknowledged that she sometimes fell during arguments and attributed those falls to being pushed, while Wayne countered by claiming she exaggerated or falsely accused him while intoxicated herself. These competing narratives were typical of domestic violence cases of the era, where women's accounts were frequently questioned or minimized. Although Wayne consistently denied committing serious physical assault, multiple biographers and family sources have noted long-standing rumors that he struck Bauer during drunken episodes. These accounts align with the divorce filing's references to emotional cruelty and violence, suggesting a pattern of intimidation and physical aggression rather than isolated arguments. Importantly, Bauer did not pursue criminal charges, a decision historians attribute to the social and legal realities of the 1940s. Wayne's fame, financial power, and carefully managed image would have made such action extremely difficult, if not career-ending, for her. After the divorce, Bauer struggled emotionally and professionally. She later acknowledged that the marriage left her psychologically damaged and affected her ability to work and maintain stability. At the time, mainstream media framed the divorce cautiously, avoiding explicit descriptions of abuse and instead presenting it as a volatile but mutual breakdown. In hindsight, however, the documented references to cruelty, alcohol-fueled violence, and Bauer's expressed fear strongly support the conclusion that she was living in an abusive domestic environment, one that was largely obscured by Wayne's status and the cultural silence surrounding domestic violence in mid-century Hollywood. Anthony Quinn. Character actor Anthony Quinn married actress Yolanda Quinn, born Louise Marie Carandino in 1966. By that time, Quinn was an established international star with significant power, wealth, and influence, while Yolanda remained largely out of the public eye. For decades, their marriage appeared stable from the outside, but later legal proceedings revealed a far more troubling reality. The first detailed public acknowledgement of abuse emerged not during the marriage itself, but during a highly contentious court hearing over Quinn's estate in 1997, near the end of his life. During that hearing, the couple's son, Danny Quinn, testified under oath that he had personally witnessed his father physically abusing his mother. He described seeing Quinn strike Yolanda during arguments and hearing him shout obscenities at her, creating an atmosphere of fear within the household. Danny further stated that these incidents were not rare or isolated, but part of a repeated pattern of behavior that left both him and his mother frightened. His testimony carried particular weight because it came from a direct eyewitness and was delivered in a legal setting rather than through rumor or media speculation. Yolanda herself never gave interviews detailing the abuse, a silence that biographers and historians interpret as deliberate self-protection. Family accounts suggest she lived in constant anxiety over Quinn's temper and learned to avoid confrontation as a means of survival. Remaining publicly silent allowed Quinn's reputation to remain intact, but it also meant that Yolanda bore the emotional cost alone. Over time, the instability of the marriage effectively ended any serious pursuit of an acting career she may have had, as she withdrew from Hollywood life and focused on protecting her children. After the divorce, Yolanda relocated to Europe and lived quietly, rarely speaking about her years with Quinn. It was only when legal disputes forced family members to speak openly that the abuse entered the public record. Commentators emphasize that during much of the mid-20th century, accusing a celebrated actor of domestic violence carried enormous personal and legal risk. Yolanda's long silence reflects the broader reality faced by many women of the era whose safety and credibility were often outweighed by the power and status of their abusers. Philip Ober. Character actor. Philip Ober was married to actress Vivian Vance, best known for her role as Ethel Mertz on I Love Lucy, in a union that lasted until their divorce in 1959. By the time their marriage ended, colleagues and friends had long observed that Vance lived in fear of Ober. While the marriage appeared outwardly conventional, accounts that emerged after Vance's death painted a far more troubling picture of repeated emotional and physical abuse. Biographical sources describe Ober as frequently belittling Vance, using harsh criticism, intimidation, and physical aggression to assert control over her. Reports from the set of I Love Lucy indicate that Ober's behavior sometimes interfered with Vance's professional life. Writers and backstage staff noted that she often appeared visibly distressed before filming, and in some instances Ober allegedly dragged a trembling Vance off stage during confrontations. Friends later corroborated that Ober's heavy drinking often preceded violent incidents, and that he had a pattern of striking Vance during arguments. These behaviors created an environment of constant tension, leaving Vance anxious and fearful in both her personal and professional life. Despite enduring this abuse, Vance never spoke publicly about her experiences. The studio system of the 1950s, which prioritized star image and public perception, discouraged any discussion of personal troubles, particularly domestic violence. Vance feared professional repercussions and further intimidation if she were to disclose Ober's cruelty. Only after her death did colleagues and biographers begin to reconstruct the pattern of abuse she suffered, piecing together accounts from friends, co-workers, and behind-the-scenes observations. The long-term impact on Vance was profound. She carried anxiety and fear well beyond the marriage, admitting privately to friends that she had hated him and had lasting difficulties trusting men. Ober's repeated physical and emotional mistreatment, combined with the cultural and professional silences of the time, effectively forced Vance to cope privately, illustrating how the power dynamics of mid-20th century Hollywood enabled abuse to remain hidden for decades. Clark Gable, Hollywood leading man. Clark Gable married English actress Lady Sylvia Ashley in 1949, marking his fourth marriage. Their union lasted only 3 years, ending in a highly publicized divorce in 1952. While Gable initiated the proceedings in London, citing Sylvia's mental cruelty, the case implied serious emotional abuse on both sides. Contemporary reporting, including articles from the New York Times, described mutual accusations of cruelty, though the press largely avoided explicitly detailing the nature of any violent or abusive behavior. Behind closed doors, however, Sylvia later revealed in memoirs and letters that Gable's behavior had left her emotionally distressed and deeply humiliated. According to Sylvia, Gable's infidelities were frequent and blatant, and his temperament could shift suddenly from charm to rage. She described arguments with him as exhausting and disorienting, leaving her feeling powerless, frightened, and trapped. Sylvia wrote that during disputes, she often felt as if she were hitting a brick wall, illustrating the emotional toll of enduring the famous actor's explosive outbursts. These patterns of intimidation and humiliation suggest that their marriage involved a sustained period of psychological abuse, though in public discourse it was framed more as incompatibility than cruelty. The divorce had immediate consequences for Sylvia's career and personal life. Once divorced, she returned to Europe and largely withdrew from acting, speaking little about her experiences. At the time, 1950s Hollywood studios maintained strict control over the narratives surrounding their stars. Accusations of abuse, particularly against a male star as prominent as Gable, could damage both parties' reputations, often leading women to remain silent. Modern historians note that Gable's legal claim of cruelty indicates that Sylvia's grievances were likely credible, and that the emotional abuse she endured was recognized, at least legally, even if the press minimized it. Her story highlights the broader pattern in classic Hollywood, where powerful men's behavior toward their spouses was often hidden, leaving women like Sylvia to navigate fear, humiliation, and professional consequences largely on their own. Robert Keith, actress Peg Entwistle, a teenage stage and film performer, married actor Robert Keith in 1927. By the time their marriage ended in 1932, Entwistle had already become publicly known for her talent on stage, yet her personal life was marked by turmoil. In the years leading up to her tragic death, she filed for divorce from Keith, citing abuse and cruelty. The divorce petition described Keith as harsh, unkind, and controlling, indicating that Entwistle had endured sustained emotional hardship. While the specifics of his abusive behavior were not made public, largely because discussing domestic abuse at the time was socially unacceptable, friends later recalled that Entwistle often appeared frightened and trapped within the marriage, suggesting a pattern of intimidation and emotional suffering. The combination of marital stress, professional setbacks, and isolation likely contributed to Entwistle's despair. By 1931, she had largely stepped away from screen work and was employed as a waitress, a significant step down from the trajectory of her early acting career. Her separation from the film industry, combined with the emotional toll of her abusive marriage, left her vulnerable and socially isolated. Historians point out that, in the 1930s, the studio system and social norms often pressured young actresses to remain silent about personal hardships, particularly domestic abuse, in order to maintain reputations and employment prospects. The divorce record thus provides the clearest evidence of Keith's cruelty, though it remains terse and devoid of the vivid details modern audiences might expect. Peg Entwistle's story has become emblematic of the dangers faced by young women in Hollywood during this period. Her tragic death, when she jumped from the Hollywoodland sign in 1932, is widely regarded as a reflection of both her personal despair and the cumulative pressures of a hostile domestic environment. The combination of emotional abuse, societal expectations, and professional marginalization underscores how profoundly destructive such marriages could be for women in early Hollywood, leaving trauma unspoken and often unacknowledged until after their deaths. John Gilbert. Silent film star John Gilbert married actress Virginia Bruce in 1932, his fourth marriage, and the union ended in divorce just 2 years later in 1934. Newspaper accounts and court records from the time indicate that Bruce's divorce filing charged Gilbert with cruelty, signaling sustained mistreatment rather than isolated incidents. Biographical accounts describe Gilbert as volatile, particularly when under the influence of alcohol or when facing career difficulties. Bruce reportedly endured episodes of intense jealousy, emotional intimidation, and physical aggression, including throwing furniture and hurling insults during conflicts. These incidents created a household environment of fear and instability, making it difficult for Bruce to maintain both personal and professional equilibrium. The divorce proceedings resulted in a substantial financial settlement for Bruce, suggesting that the court found her claims credible. Despite this, she rarely spoke publicly about the abuse, reflecting the social and professional constraints on women of the 1930s. At that time, contract players at major studios such as MGM were expected to preserve the image of both themselves and the male stars they worked with, leaving little room to expose domestic violence without risking career damage. Bruce's professional trajectory was affected as a result. After her divorce, she primarily took character roles rather than continuing as a leading MGM contract actress, illustrating how the emotional and professional consequences of abuse were intertwined. Historians regard the documented cruelty claim in her divorce as clear evidence that Bruce was a victim of domestic mistreatment. While she did not provide memoirs or detailed accounts at the time, the combination of court documentation, contemporary reporting, and retrospective biographies paints a consistent picture of a woman living under sustained psychological and physical stress. Bruce's experience exemplifies the broader pattern in early Hollywood, where young actresses often endured abusive relationships with powerful male stars in silence, navigating fear, career risks, and social pressures, while coping with trauma largely out of public view. John Agar. Actress Shirley Temple married actor John Agar in 1945 when she was still a teenager, entering a marriage that would prove deeply distressing. Temple later reflected in her autobiography that Agar's temperament grew increasingly frightening over the course of their union. Friends and biographers have corroborated that his anger could flare suddenly, creating an unpredictable and tense home environment. While public accounts from the time largely avoided specifics, the 1949 divorce filings provide clear evidence of the marriage's volatility. Temple cited mental cruelty as the grounds for divorce, a legal term commonly used to describe emotional abuse and fear-inducing behavior. Archival news reports note that Judge Kincaid set a court date to hear the charges of cruelty, showing that Temple's legal team formally accused Agar of abusive conduct. Though Temple never publicly detailed physical assaults, private accounts suggest she endured more than just emotional strain. Friends noted that after the divorce, she seemed visibly relieved, hinting at the pressure and fear she had lived with. The marriage's impact extended beyond emotional distress. Their daughter was awarded full custody to Temple, indicating the court's recognition that Agar's behavior was unfit for parental responsibilities. Temple's subsequent withdrawal from acting and later focus on public life reflect both personal choice and the lingering effects of a marriage marked by terror and instability. Historians and retrospectives underscore that Temple's experience illustrates the broader constraints placed on women in mid-20th century Hollywood. Young actresses were often expected to preserve their public image, with studios actively discouraging disclosure of personal abuse. By handling her divorce quietly yet firmly, Temple navigated a system designed to protect male stars' reputations at the expense of women's safety. Over time, her accounts and biographical research reveal that she endured both emotional and physical mistreatment, highlighting the challenges women faced when escaping abusive relationships during this era. Gary Merrill. Actor Gary Merrill married screen legend Bette Davis in 1950, and their union lasted a decade. Though publicly their marriage was often portrayed as tempestuous but glamorous, later accounts from Davis's daughter B.D. Hyman and biographers reveal a pattern of severe domestic abuse. Merrill reportedly struggled with alcoholism, and his temper could escalate into physical aggression. According to these sources, Merrill would strike Davis during arguments, sometimes leaving scratches and bruises, while also humiliating her in front of staff and friends. The violence was not constant, but the unpredictable and fear-inducing environment placed Davis under sustained emotional strain throughout their marriage. Despite enduring such treatment, Davis maintained a composed public image. Contemporary press coverage focused on the couple's incompatibility and Merrill's drinking rather than the physical abuse, reflecting Hollywood's strict control over star reputations. Even after their divorce in 1960, Davis rarely spoke of the violence in detail, instead noting privately that she had learned to be tough in order to cope with Merrill's volatility. The secrecy surrounding the abuse highlights the era's pressures, where speaking openly could jeopardize a woman's career and damage the carefully cultivated public image of a major star. Biographers and family records now confirm that Merrill's behavior constituted both emotional and physical mistreatment. The court filings, anecdotal recollections, and private letters all point to a marriage in which Davis was regularly subjected to intimidation, humiliation, and assault. Despite these hardships, Davis's career continued to flourish, illustrating her resilience and professionalism even while living under duress. Her experience underscores the broader context of mid-20th century Hollywood, where domestic abuse was often hidden, minimized, or excused in order to preserve male star power, leaving women like Davis to navigate trauma largely in private. Richard Arlen. Silent and sound film actor Richard Arlen was married to actress Jobina Ralston from 1927 until their divorce in 1935. While their union was publicly portrayed as conventional and even glamorous, private accounts that emerged decades later reveal a far darker reality. Friends of Ralston described Arlen as prone to violent, jealous rages, a behavior that escalated particularly when he drank. Biographical sources note that Ralston knew what it was like to be assaulted by one's husband, indicating a pattern of physical abuse that created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation throughout their marriage. According to some accounts, Ralston would go so far as to dab concealer under her eyes to hide bruises from her young son, attempting to shield him from the emotional and physical consequences of Arlen's temper. The marriage had a profound effect on Ralston's personal and professional life. She effectively retired from show business around the same time as the divorce, leaving behind a promising career in film and stage acting. The decision to withdraw from public life was influenced not only by the trauma she endured, but also by the social pressures and studio expectations of the era, which discouraged women from discussing domestic problems openly. Hollywood culture at the time prioritized the preservation of male stars' reputations, leaving victims like Ralston with few avenues for support or public acknowledgement. As a result, much of what is known about Arlen's abusive behavior comes from retrospective interviews and biographies, rather than contemporary reporting or official records. Ralston herself never published a personal account of her experiences, reflecting both societal norms and personal discretion. Friends and historians have pieced together a portrait of a marriage in which Arlen's temper and physical aggression dominated, demonstrating how even highly respected actors could inflict lasting harm on their spouses with little fear of public consequence. After the divorce, Ralston refused contact with Arlen for decades, a silent but powerful assertion of her autonomy and a measure of protection from further abuse. Her story exemplifies the way social constraints, fear, and Hollywood's image-conscious culture allowed domestic violence to remain hidden, leaving many women to cope with trauma quietly while the abuser's public persona remained untarnished. If any of these stories shocked you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to explore more untold stories from Hollywood's past.